criticism is not necessarily inherently bad. It's just recognizing when our partner can't access us and the emotional connection again, that's where it starts to cause an issue. So if we notice that we tend to use criticism, we're likely intelligent and we're likely have really good critical thinking skills, and we don't want to throw that out completely. We're looking at how to complement relational skills that allow our partner to see us more clearly and respond to us more efficiently and just have better access to us.
Welcome to yourbrilliance.com. I'm your host, Amy Waterman. If you want to feel depressed, do a Google search for nagging quotes, and you will come up with pages and pages and pages of quotes all about nagging women. Like from Proverbs, it says, better to live on the roof than to live in a house with a nagging wife. Yeah, to these constant jokes like, you call it nagging, I call it listen to what I said the first time. It feels like everyone picks on women. But here's what I know. Women take responsibility for their relationships, and they take responsibility for their home. And to make sure that both of those things function optimally, they need a little help. And so they ask their guy for help, and it doesn't get them anywhere. And so they ask him again, and it still doesn't get them anywhere. And through no fault of their own, they turn into nags. So what's the way out? Well, our guest for today calls this the critical defensive pattern, and she helps clients break free. Dr. Jessica Higgins is a licensed psychologist and a licensed professional counselor with over 20 years of experience and a passion for helping couples shift out of criticism into connection. And today she's going to share with us some tools to help us get our needs met without feeling like a nag. Welcome, Dr. Higgins.
Thank you for having me, Amy.
Oh, it's so good to have you, because when I was doing the research for this, I thought it was crazy that men have been criticizing women for criticizing them since biblical times and like probably before. So my question to you is, when do you think this pattern originated?
Well, there's so much to this question, and I think there's a larger historical and even philosophical frame that I'm not. Perhaps this isn't my expertise to speak on, but I do know that there has been a real divide between the head and the heart, or the mind and the body. And, when we look at research as it relates to psychology and men and women, and look, I think these patterns go beyond gender, but I do think it's really useful to look at the stereotypes because it helps us understand. And what we find with the research is that men, brain-wise, neurologically, have the same capacity for empathy. And that might be surprising, because what we typically see is, again, when we look at what John Gottman would call stonewalling, which is more of the withdrawing, the not talking, the going silent, shutting down, and not being really that responsive, 80% of stonewallers are typically men. Or 80% of stonewallers are men. And so when we go back to the research around empathy, the same capacity is there for men and women, yet women have a greater ability to articulate. And if we look at this nature nurture, there's probably stuff to be said on either end of the how we're evolutionarily been developing, and then also how we're nurtured. And typically mothers will talk more to their daughters about emotions and how to manage relationships. And there's a lot more language in the developmental process of a woman, and just even female friends talking about emotions. So I think men get a bad rap that they don't have the capacity, or they're not that empathetic, or don't turn towards these conversations. However, they are feeling a lot. What is very stereotypical or typical is that they're more focused on keeping stability and trying to not rock the boat, not saying or doing something that is gonna escalate the situation. And so if their significant other is approaching them with a heated, because most, again, I know you know this, but communication, over 80% of communication is nonverbal. So if they see that their loved one is heightened and kind of angry or frustrated or has issue, their alarm bells are going off. Right. And then I'm happy to talk more about the specific critical defensive patterns. But when we speak about gender, typically there's someone who's seeking connection, which would be the pursuer, and then someone who's a little bit more of the withdrawer, which tends to be more focused on keeping stability or protecting the safety of the dynamic.
So that's really good, because instead of turning it into women are bad, men are good, which is how all of those quotes end up framing it, what you're saying is that it's turning it into women are articulating. That's why they're they're the ones that are actually talking, and the men are trying to keep things from changing because they want to keep it stable. So they both have something positive they're trying to achieve, but it's just not working. So that puts us women into a really difficult situation, because we are articulate and we do have needs, and we want to make things better in our relationships. We don't want our relationships to stay the same if they feel stuck or if they're not helping. So how can we articulate our needs in a way that will help him listen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to also give some backdrop to this, because criticism, unfortunately, it's a main predictor for divorce. Like, it really does cause a big wedge and destructive nature to the bond. And so I'm not saying it's the cause of divorce, but this type of dynamic can be very, very problematic. And if we look at criticism, it can be pretty adaptive. And depending on how we were raised, right? A lot of us were raised actually where emotions weren't really attuned to or seen, or really there wasn't a lot of space for. So to be safer, we go to the intellect. It's not as vulnerable. And then if we look at society, right, we get in school and our careers, like I work with a lot of high level people, attorneys, scientists, CEOs, and they are making decisions all day long. And we need those critical thinking skills for sure. And we've gotten a lot of positive reinforcement for that criticism. When it comes to relationship, this is where we have to put on a relational hat, because most people do not respond well to unsolicited feedback, critique, or evaluation. However, when we think about relationship, your person, your significant other cares about you, cares about how you feel, and cares about how you experience. They don't actually care that much about whether or not you think they're right or not, or they could be doing it better, or that you're helping them grow themselves, or, any of these things. Honestly, people can go back and forth and argue about that till the end of the time. But what they do care about is you. So, and where this also gets complicated, there's so much to be said about criticism. It can also be, not only is it an adaptive strategy to feel safer to be in the head, but it also has a little bit of a nervous system juice. Because if we feel threat, it's really normal to look at the outside. What's the source of that threat? There's an ouch, and how come there's an ouch? And I'm going to address that. And there's an external thing to focus on, right? It makes logical sense. And if we're looking at something outside of us and our partner's feeling criticized, they're going to likely get defensive, because they're going to have all the reasons why they're not the way you're describing them or characterizing them, and that they're going to rebuttal and defend the characterization. And again, if we go back to what they really are interested in is how we feel, or understanding where we get scared or we're feeling alone, that's where it becomes interesting, and they lean in because they care and they want to support. But if you're attacking me, I'm going to likely defend, right? So to answer your question, it's a slippery slope. It feels very subtle, and it might not even seem like that big of a deal, because if we're in our intellect, it's like, yeah, you didn't do X, and I'm going to call that out, right? Like not a big thing. But when we look at the emotional safety of the relationship, and again, if your partner's on your heels and they're not feeling safe, or they're feeling like there's an issue, their protective strategy is to go into shut down or kind of withhold. And then that puts a real wedge in the communication, because if you're asking for help or you're trying to get a need met, but it's being packaged in criticism, they're getting distracted by that delivery and they're not even hearing what you want, what you need. So it takes a level of work. And this is kind of habitual and it can get even addictive because our nervous system gets a little bit of a hit when we get into that kind of conflictual, like call it out. It's like a release valve. So we have to do a level of work to access what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm needing? And revealing that more vulnerably. And that can be difficult if we haven't known that our needs are and our emotions are going to be seen, right? So it's taking a huge risk. Dynamic over time, it doesn't feel like a very, like, I think most of us know that these cycles, as you're talking about the nag, like that's so steeped that anything I say, even if I do get vulnerable, he's probably not going to hear me.
Yeah. Because I think the thing is, I think for so many of us, we don't see ourselves as critical people. We're not saying this stuff to criticize. We're saying it out of love because our relationship has a stumbling block and there's a really easy solution. And so we offer that solution in a loving way to make things better. And I think it's really hard. I think often we're experiencing that defensive reaction no matter how we say it. There is absolutely no way to say it in a way that won't trigger that defensive reaction. Or the other one we get all the time is complete apathy. Like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that, and then it never gets done. Oh yeah, sure, I'll do that, and it never gets done. And so there seems to be, like in our partners, there seems to be a complete refusal to go with us to the places where there's stuff that isn't working and there's easy solutions. They just, as you said, they want to stay in that stable place. They don't want to stay in that fixing place. I think that is where I really get caught up and I wonder what the solution is.
Yes. So there's two things that I want to say to that. One is there's no crafty, skillful way to talk about the other person and them not get defensive. If the delivery and the focus is on the other person, there's no way to like crack that code where they're not going to get defensive unless there's a lot of safety and bond and rapport and just sense of goodwill that it's not causing a little bit of a rift. Then we can tolerate some of that, but even still there tends to be that somebody's going to be on their heels. So we really need to reverse engineer this and look at, if my partner were to do X, Y, and Z, pick up their shoes in the middle of the path, or do the dishes, take out the trash, whatever it is, what would that allow me to feel and help unpack and go deeper into what is it that it would allow me? Like, I want to feel that you thought about me, or I want to feel cared about. That's a very different orientation that our partner will typically turn towards. And then the second, which takes a lot of practice, and your partner might not get it right away, right? Even if we do that, they might feel that it's different, but they might not actually respond in the way that we're looking. And it takes a little bit of reworking this. And it's like letting the old patterns go and building new patterns. But the other thing, Amy, I want to speak to is if there's an entrenched pattern here where there's the pursuer and the distancer, one person's protesting and they're looking for attention. They're trying to seek connection around an issue or a hurt or a pain point. And if the other partner has been turning away, if that's steeped for a while, that's going to feel very unsafe for both people. And that's very hard to give those reciprocal responses that help us feel so comforted and soothed. So it's almost like we've gotten off track and we've really been off track. So it's like this ground is not safe. This territory is not comfortable and we don't turn towards it. So that would speak to just, I know these things are so common, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't have this safety in turning towards each other when there is a pain point and getting that resolved.
Okay, so I have to ask the question then. So what do those couples do?
Well, it's typically, and one of the main reasons for it, I also mentioned divorce as far as criticism, but women are the main initiators of divorce. And oftentimes it is because of a lack of an emotional intimacy or that lack of emotional connection. And so when we're speaking super stereotypical, if in this case is the way we're talking about it, if the wife or the woman in the relationship is initiating a conversation and the husband or the partner is turning away or not, kind of dismissing or what, you're just being, overreacting, or that likely is occurring on many fronts in many areas. And so it's going to typically over time really cause that sense of disconnect. He doesn't see me. He's not really with me. He's not for me. Right. And we feel like I had a client the other day who was describing, and they've been together for 20 plus years. They're a beautiful couple, have 4 children, and they're both really successful. And yet they're like, when we get into this place, it's like team me and team him. Like we are not for each other. We don't have each other's back. So typically people usually get the support of a coach or a therapist to help them reprocess some of these injuries, help them find a way to get emotional balance, be able to respond to each other. Because when we don't respond, even when we think about our best friend and we're like, oh my gosh, let me tell you what happened, and they don't respond, that's going to hurt, right? So it's natural and human for us to respond to each other. And when couples have gotten out of step in responding to each other, it's going to cause disconnect. So it's helping look at this, confront this, and it's usually scary. It's usually painful. And so I would recommend getting some support because look, in every area we can seek support and guidance as a physical trainer, a financial planner. And so in this area, it's typically very intimate and private. And yet it's a tricky terrain when we have, especially if we grew up in families that didn't do this well and we didn't have it modeled for us well.
Yes, and the support I want to go into, because you offer not only some one-on-one counseling with people, but you also offer an online course that can help couples connect better and work through this conflict. But one of the questions I had for that, what if a woman is watching this today and she just can't get anywhere with her husband, and her husband keeps on saying, you're nagging, you're criticizing, leave me alone. She's stuck in that. Can she do that on her own, or is this something that couples actually need to work on together?
It's a great question. So I would say both. And the course that you're referring to that's about criticism in particular, this I would suggest for a person that wants to look at that tendency and be in their lane, right? On their side of this, like in their zone, their individual zone. And there's a lot of research and practices and deep dives around how to look at what's at play there. And when we look at the couple dynamic, that would be, I do have a course that's for couples, but it's not specific to criticism. I would get support in coaching to really look at that pattern, to really get that support to rework those patterns and get into connection.
And you are offering our viewers a free gift to help introduce them a little bit more to some of these concepts, right?
Yes. And that is a guide that just gives people a side-by-side comparison of what critical tendencies typically look like. And again, I want to say these are very natural, very common, like you're talking about. I'm just addressing something that could be up-leveled, right? It's not a big deal. And yet when we talk about relationship and how we really want to feel seen and in high regard with the other, that is very sensitive ground. And so those critical statements, while in business might be fine, in relationship, it can cause a bit of a rift. So if we do a level of unpacking that I was talking about, that does take work and getting to more of what that underlying need is or the vulnerability, then I give a side-by-side comparison of examples, specific language that what a critical statement would look like and how to turn that into a request that is in one's own like reveal, right? The vulnerability of, I want to feel like you are considering me, right? Or I get scared when you don't, so it's more about that my partner could hear what it is, what's going on for me and what it is for me.
Yeah, and that is fantastic. It's always so easy, don't say this instead. And it breaks down, it makes it so much easier. So for those of you watching, you want to go get your guide right now on how to stop the criticism cycle, we have a link for you. Just go to yourbrilliance.org/criticism. That's yourbrilliance.org/criticism. Thank you so much, Dr. Higgins, for coming on to the show. And I wondered if you had any last message that you would like to leave our viewers with.
Yes, what's in my heart right now is just that, again, criticism is not necessarily inherently bad. It's just recognizing when our partner can't access us and the emotional connection again, that's where it starts to cause an issue. So if we notice that we tend to use criticism, we're likely intelligent and we're likely have really good critical thinking skills, and we don't want to throw that out completely. We're looking at how to complement relational skills that allow our partner to see us more clearly and respond to us more efficiently and just have better access to us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you out there for watching. Now, what was your biggest insight or aha moment while watching this interview? If you feel comfortable, share it with us in the comments. And for more interviews like these, make sure to subscribe to Your Brilliance TV here on YouTube. And then come on over to yourbrilliance.com for more tips and insights on how you can live your most brilliant life. See you next time.